A professor of theology sent out a couple of tweets last week, and I just thought I'd take a few minutes to discuss some of them. So just have a look at this. Last week, Massimo Faggioli, some people call him by the nickname Max Beans, he sent out this tweet about Bishop Barron. And he said, Bishop Barron is a bishop of the Catholic Church, also a very influential one. And I tried to show respect on social media as well. But this here is incredible, a real scandal. And he's referring to an interview that Bishop Barron has done with Heather Hing and Bret Weinstein. And then he retweeted his tweet saying, to understand how serious this business of a bishop is, it is not necessary to disturb the theology of the episcopate of Vatican II. That of the Council of Trent would be enough, as well as a minimum of common sense and good taste. So I just thought the tweet was very interesting at the time. I didn't have time to listen to the interview. For those who don't know who Massimo Faggioli is, he even has his own Wikipedia page. Massimo Faggioli, born in 1970, is a church historian, a professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University, Pennsylvania, columnist of Le Croix International, and contributor writer for Commonwealth magazine. He was on the faculty of the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota from 2009 to 2016, where he was the founding director of the Institute of Catholicism and Citizenship from 2014 and 15. Since 2017, he has been adjunct professor of the Broken Bay Institute, which is part of the Australian Institute of Theological Education in Sydney, Australia. So, you can Google him. So since Massimo Faggioli has given such promotion for this video with Bishop Barron, I decided to spend the time and listen to the whole video, which I did find very interesting. I think Bret and Heather give some interesting conversation in the world. And if people are not aware, Bret was cancelled off YouTube for discussing things we cannot discuss on YouTube. Isn't that amazing? And if you've listened to Bret and his podcasts, you couldn't really say that this guy is extremely controversial. He's just a good podcaster. He explores different topics. He gets people engaged. So there's one thing in Bishop Barron's interview, and I'm sure Massimo didn't even listen to the interview. There's one thing in the interview, and I'm going to take the liberty of playing part of that interview because I thought it was really interesting and critical, vital discussion that we need in the world today and we need in the church today. And I think Bishop Barron really nailed it with some of the things that he was discussing in this interview. So I'm just going to play you a part of the interview that I think we need to have more discussion of this. And I think it's good that we have a bishop that's driving a discussion on this point. So let's just listen to this, because I just want to have a little talk on this afterwards.
Let me raise a couple things here that, as I was reading your book, I'm thinking, yeah, church agrees with that. Yeah, that's church's point of view. I'll name a couple. The issues of sex and gender. I mean, so making a certain distinction between them, but then saying, look, you can't talk about gender apart from sex. And that attempt has just been disastrous. I think we would certainly agree with that. I highlighted we should not interfere with children's development by trying to block, pause, or radically alter their development. Amen to that, I would say.
So obvious.
Also, the role of pornography in our society. I mean, it's just so apparent. You know, my generation, thank God, we didn't have the internet, and so people didn't get addicted the same way. But I know from dealing with young people for years, the vast majority of them, frankly, are addicted to pornography, and the hugely deleterious effect that's had on their lives. And of course, the church again says yes. And it seems to me that you would be making your own case for these things, but we'd be agreeing very much with the conclusion. So say a little bit about that. Like, why are you standing against these things?
Well, let's start with porn.
Yeah.
First of all, we have to draw a distinction, right? It's not that we are saying that erotic content is inherently bad, right? Erotic content obviously has a very long history, and in fact, our museums are filled with it,
yeah.
Right? What puts pornography in a separate category is the market influence over its content. And if you think for a second about what it is that people who produce pornography are doing in the market, they're competing with each other for attention.
Yeah.
And in order to get attention, when in fact what they're selling is just access to erotic content, they have to push the boundaries of what's acceptable in order to stand out in that saturated market. Now, the problem is, if you look at how ancient people came to understand what sex was, there was a lot that was by observation, right? If you're sleeping in the same hut with your parents and you're pretending to be asleep and they're engaged in something, you learn about how people actually sexually interact, as uncomfortable as that question may be. But if you then take a creature that is trying to figure out what the sexual world is, and what you give them as far as sexual content is pornography, in which the pornographers have been in an arms race with each other, dipping into every taboo in order to get attention, then people come to believe that this behavior is normal, and then they enact it on each other. And that could hardly be more destructive of the kinds of relations. I mean, sex is an important part of permanent romantic relationships. And for people to have been misinformed about what the nature of that interaction is supposed to be means that they are now not on a solid footing to build those relationships and to sustain them.
So it's dehumanizing and reductionist again. But it also pretends that that only the person who is observing the porn has any agency in a sexual act, and I believe that. And I can't point to any data here, but I believe that people who come into their sexual understanding by watching porn.
It's all about me. It's
all about me, and no matter what the person watching does, cannot change the thing that is happening. And so, of course, they are going to be, when they come to find what might be their life partner, that they have no idea actually what to do to actually come into relationship with them.
Isn't it true that statistically, like, young people are having much less sex than they ever did before, and they're having much more difficulty with sexual relations because of porn? Many argue
it's not making them happy.
It's not making them happy.
The liberation isn't making them happy, and the pornography isn't making them happy. And the fact is, we've now been involved in this conversation for a long time because, of course, we had all sorts of students who were trying to navigate romantic relationships, and we heard about these things. More and more, the recognition that whatever it is that people have been told they should want is not making them happy when they get it, that's dawning on people. What they don't have is any idea of what they're supposed to do about it.
And it seems that it is increasingly the norm, that it is, we have 2 teenage boys, and we hear from our teenage boys who do not watch porn, that it is, they are not believed in their friend group.
Is that right? When they say they don't watch porn, they're not believed.
They're not believed, and it is so normalized that they that it can't come up that a girl that they might be interested in should want to know this, right? This should be something that any young woman would want to know about a potential partner. But it is so normalized that even that you can't even bring it up, because bringing it up, no, actually I don't do that. That's not part of my life. Isn't part of a normal conversation. That itself would be strange. So that tells us that we are really far afield.
Aren't they starting to, like they're saying 11, 12 years old, like these very young kids start watching pornography?
I think so.
And their brains must be just wired then from that point.
Well, we set them up because we have a culture that is obsessed with sex, in part because even in movies where that's not exactly what they're selling, it's still a mechanism to get people in seats. So we have a sex-obsessed culture, which means that kids are very understandably very curious about what this phenomenon is that seems so powerful. And then the answer they are given is completely misleading. And what they don't have are good models, right? Because to the extent that there are good models, they're more or less invisible and they don't leave a lot of evidence. And they don't have any way of inferring what role sex is supposed to be playing, because it's something that humans are not very straightforward about discussing. So, we've given them effectively an unsolvable puzzle, and it's no surprise that they're not solving it.
Here you have just a small piece of that interview, and I'm going to put the link to the full interview below so you can just go through it. Thought it was very interesting. I do think it's important in this world. We do have freedom of speech to discuss relevant topics of the day. For example, when a certain company is making billions and billions and billions of euros off a new product that is being rushed to market and some places mandated, I do think it's fine to have a discussion. Don't you think so? That's what Bret was trying to do when he got cancelled off YouTube. I'm not going to go down that road and talk about the companies or the products or so forth. But I will say about Bishop Barron, he is entering and discussing topics that are very relevant and very important in today's world. Yesterday we had this a meeting with a Jesuit, Jerry O'Halloran in Ballina. We were it was all about the synodal way and the synodal path. Somebody invited me to go. I'm going to do a podcast on this famous Jesuit, Irish Jesuits evening. I'm not there yet, but when I looked around the room, and I saw the majority of those in the room were over 50 or over 60. There wasn't a single. There wasn't any engagement with people with young kids, young kids. And I just thought, they're on about the synodal way, this and that and the other. And they're completely lost in the church, the real problems that are destroying the next generation. Because if you've ever been to a mass, and I'd say this on both sides, if you've ever been to mass, how many priests actually will talk about pornography in that mass directed at parents or children? I mean, most teenagers and children don't even want to go to mass. But where are we talking about this critical subject? The church has said for years pornography was a sin. To look at pornography, to objectify somebody was a sin. And what is a sin? A sin is separating us from God, but it's also separating us from the truth. Getting drunk is a sin. Okay, getting drunk is a sin. It'll also destroy your liver. If you go, it's separating us from the truth, and it's separating us from what our true nature should be, which is to love the good, the true, and the beautiful. God gave us a beautiful liver, and we go and destroy it with alcohol. But God gave us a beautiful sexuality, and we go and destroy it by objectifying people. It's very interesting in the interview when they're talking about this constant battle for the porn companies, this constant battle for innovation to capture people. I mean, it's pervasive and it's destroying relationships. It destroys relationships. It destroys the true nature of our sexuality. And I hear so few bishops talking about this. And so I challenge Massimo Faggioli. You're going after Bishop Barron for driving discussions. Some traditionalists will go after Bishop Barron because he's having these discussions. Where are we having these same discussions? Where are the traditional movement entering more to have these discussions? Are we just going to say no or what? No, we can't have that discussion with Bret and his wife because, they've said other things we're not comfortable with, and you can't bring them into the Catholic world. Hold on a second. Just because Bishop Barron does not get everything right, that we don't agree with everything, he's doing something very, very important in the church, which is driving discussion on key points that need to be spoken about. At the end of the day, we're fighting about liturgy at the moment, but we've a whole generation of Catholics that haven't engaged in the basics of our faith. A whole generation that will waste far more time on porn than they will ever do on worshiping, giving praise and worship to God. They won't encounter him. This whole generation that's consumed by addictions. It's not just porn, it's drink, it's drugs, it's computer games and all of these other things that are sucking the life out of a whole generation. We can see it. Where are we having these discussions in the church? Instead of, putting up a tweet saying, this is a major scandal that a bishop is having a conversation with Bret and his wife. Did you look at the interview? Did you take the time to go through it? And if we're going to criticize Bishop, what are we offering as an alternative? What is our alternative that we're offering the Catholic world? I just think it's very, very interesting what's going on in the church. I mean, this synodal process is mostly led by over 40s, over 50s, who think that their view of Catholicism is what's going to carry us forward in the church, when in reality, if you look at traditional movements, they have some really good engagement with the next generation, with young people, getting men involved in the liturgy, getting boys involved in the liturgy, getting them to understand the teachings of the Catholic Church on sexuality, on all of these things. I mean, we're never going to have a perfect generation. But if we give up on preaching what is a sin, and it's not just understanding that a sin is taking you away from the true, the good, and the beautiful. Isn't it more? I mean, no honest man would ever give their daughter, their sister, up to the pornography industry. No man, or son, because it can go both ways. No man would give their children up to that industry once they hold their children in their arms. If they're men enough to be fathers, no man would give their children up to that industry. And yet, we have generation consumed by it. And if you say, I don't watch pornography, you're looked at as really strange. Oh, Robert, you're a bit, like this. I mean, I agree with Bishop Barron. Back in the day, in the 80s, pornography consisted with a magazine, if you were lucky enough to find one, because they were not really very available, and you'd be, you wouldn't go in and buy. Most shops in Ireland didn't have them. Today, it's pervasive. And it's increasing, and it's on steroids now. It's, there's this race to make it ever more captivating, to make it ever more consuming. I mean, this is where I understand the church's teaching far better, I'd say, than previous generations, because the church is kind of guarding us off what is going to destroy the true, the good, and the beautiful. It's guarding us off what will destroy our nature. The church has been saying, getting drunk is a sin for many reasons, not so much. And it's a sin because, you can do stupid things when you're drunk, but you also destroy the body that God gave you. And pornography will slowly do the same. There's that famous video of Ted Bundy. What did he say? That, any of these serial murderers or serial rapists, they started with pornography. It's there on video. You can look it up on YouTube. I mean, and why wouldn't you? Where do you start? Where do you get the ideas from? Where do we seed this into people's minds? So, not to go on too much, but I suppose I'm just doing this video to point out to Massimo, if we're going to object to a bishop having a discussion, anybody in the church, if any of us are going to start objecting to what Bishop Barron is doing, and I'm not here to defend Bishop Barron, I'm here to defend the conversation, this conversation that we need to have in the church. Because I can tell you, he's one of the few bishops that's actually willing to have conversation on topics that are critical in this moment in time in society. I mean, there's lots of secular movements now that men are reaching out to, totally secular movements that men are reaching out to have abstinence, to get off pornography that's ruining their relationships. And these are completely non-religious, and secular. And yet we have that teaching for a long time, and we've not been able to teach it. We've not been able to give it to the next generation. Why? We know it's wrong. Like, no man would give their children up to that industry, and yet men are looking at that. And of course that industry will trump up some woman or some person to say, look, I've no problems working for this industry, I'm liberated by it. Yes, but the thousands and thousands and thousands of victims that have been forced into that because, they had no other way. I mean, it is rife. I mean, the porn industry, prostitution industry is rife with abuse. It's obvious, but nobody wants to talk about these things. Nobody wants to have a discussion in the church. You never hear it from rarely if ever hear it from an Irish bishop. There isn't a single Irish bishop that would do an interview like that would push forward this conversation. And yet this is what our children, this is that generation that we're saying, well, we have to reach out to young people. I think there's one priest, is Father Luke Damasi. He's spoken about it in a few videos, trying to have that conversation in schools, and people are getting very uncomfortable. Oh, no, we can't talk about this. We can't. Like, where do we go forward if we do not talk about this? Children won't be able to reach faith if you're not talking about the obstacles to faith. And sin is an obstacle that stops us arriving to the true, the good, and the beautiful. the word sin, when we speak about it, maybe we're not conveying to the next generation what sin means. Sin, in its most basic form, is a separation from the true to the good and the beautiful. And the ultimate truth, the ultimate good, and the ultimate beauty is God. And we create barriers that are stopping us seeing that light. It's like putting up an umbrella in our life and living under an umbrella. Well, we're not going to see the sun. We're not going to see that light. We're not going to see that truth, that beauty. Or living in a dark room, we're not going to see it. And that's the separation that we need to convey. What's that separation? Sin. It conveys the problems that we see in today's world. Because we know the problems. We know the problems. Sooner or later, people will come down to what the church has been teaching to know. It conveys the truth. It conveys. And it's only in this age of excess in commodities, in excess in eating, in excess in pornography. There's never been a period in human history like this moment in time, with the excesses that we have. And we can see the destruction of these excesses in people's life. We've got the obesity crisis, we've got the addiction crisis, we've got the porn crisis, and the destruction of relationships. We've never had such problems with marriage, with relationships as we have today. And we think this modern world is fantastic, do we? The tragedy of marriage breakups is sad. I'm sorry to go on here a little bit. I just wanted to come back on Massimo Faggioli to, defend that conversation. I think it is fantastic that we have a bishop there having that conversation. And if we're going to criticize Bishop Barron, what are we doing in its place? What conversation are we having in its place? Because it's always fine to sit on the fence and say, no, Bishop Barron made a mistake there, and Bishop Barron, he's talking, he's driving conversation. That's what we need in the church, everywhere, to have these conversations. We need, and not just bishops, priests as well. What priest will talk about this? These are the problems that are separating a whole generation from knowing God. Simple as. These are the real down basic problems that are separating a whole generation from knowing God. And we just look at during the lockdown. What industries went up. I think it's very interesting during this war in Russia. There were so many calls for companies to leave Russia. Not one single call for the pornography industry to leave Russia. Amazing, isn't it? If you think about, there's an app now that they have called Grindr, and it's going to float on the stock exchange for €2 billion, $2 billion, something like that. It's not just the only app. There's multiple of these things. And this is very, very interesting that, we have to get McDonald's out of Russia. What about the porn industry that's making billions around globally? We seem very selective on who we want to get rid of. It's just my thoughts on it. It'll be interesting to see what other people think. So, yeah, leave a comment below. What do you think? Where should we be going? People seem to want to box Bishop Barron into one section or another section. We need this discussion in the church. We need more of this. We need people talking. Because if we all stay in our safe zones and we only talk to the people we like about the topics we find comfortable, we are totally missing the problem in today's society, in today's world, and in the church, and in how to be able to preach the gospel to the next generation. If you want to preach the gospel to the next generation, you have to understand what that generation is spending their time on. What is their focus? Because you have to step in and try and give them another focus. And it's a very crowded market here, I tell you. It's extremely crowded, and it's very hard to draw people out of these addictions. Extremely hard. Drug addictions, pornography, drink, all of these things, they consume people. And people think that this is the only way to live and this is the only way to be normal. Seriously. You know, any boy today, any teenager today that says, I don't watch porn, he's looked upon as abnormal. That's the reality, guys. And, you know, it's quite sad that that's the world we've ended up. To think about it, it's abnormal now that a boy does not objectify a girl on a computer screen or a phone. That's where we've arrived to. And we're not able to preach that. We're not able to show the truth of the beauty of sex anymore. It's so sad. It's so sad. Anyway, leave your comments. Pray for Ireland. And let me know what you thought. Hope Bishop Barron doesn't mind me stealing a piece of that video. But I just thought it was critical to discuss this in the face of criticism that he received for having that interview. We need more of this. We need more discussion. We need to engage. We need to get our voice out. Anyway, God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.